My name is Sloan Parker. I'm 32 years old, and last week my own parents dragged me into court, claiming I manipulated my dying grandfather, the Honorable Judge Theodore Ashford, into rewriting his will. The Charleston Gazette splashed my face across the front page. Ambitious prosecutor, accused of stealing family fortune. Since then, I've counted 16 unknown calls, 3 death threats, and 1 voicemail that just whispered, "Thief." Rain streaks down my office window as the watch he left me ticks too loud on my wrist. Every tick feels like a judgment. They think I'm fighting for money. They're wrong. What they don't know is, my grandfather left behind proof that could destroy them. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family, because this story isn't just about money or inheritance. It's about what happens when the people who gave you life try to take your name, The morning the story broke, Charleston woke up buzzing my name, tumbling through talk radio and breakfast gossip. The Gazette headline bled across every doorstep. Judge's granddaughter under investigation for undue influence. Someone had leaked the civil suit before we were even served. By 8 a.m., my inbox was a landfill of questions and thinly veiled accusations. At the courthouse, a young intern avoided my eyes as she handed me the complaint. Her hands trembled like she was passing me a loaded gun. My parents' names sat in bold type across the top: Veronica and Damian Hale. Plaintiffs. My throat tightened. My coffee went cold in my hand. By noon, calls from the Judicial Appointments Committee flooded in. Temporary hold, they said. My upcoming nomination hearing was now under review. Translation: my entire career was hanging by a thread of scandal. That afternoon, I found Veronica waiting by the marble hallway outside courtroom 3. Coral lipstick perfectly intact, as if this were a luncheon, not a war. "Sloan," she said, smoothing her sleeve. "You could end this today. Settle quietly. Half for you, half for us. Keep your precious reputation." I stared at her, remembering every Sunday she never showed, every empty chair at every school event. "You care about reputation," I said, "not truth." Her smile faltered just long enough to show the venom underneath. "Truth doesn't matter here, darling. Appearances do." The echo of her heels followed me down the corridor. I didn't look back. I just repeated the breathing. My grandfather taught me before my first mock trial. In, hold, out. This wasn't about appearances anymore. It was about legacy, his and mine. I grew up in a house that smelled like lemon, old books, and the faint smoke from my grandfather's evening pipe. The Ashford house sat at the end of a magnolia-lined street, its shutters faded sea green, the porch swing creaking in rhythm with the cicadas. From the outside, it looked like stability itself: solid columns, wide eaves, white curtains that swayed like they had nothing to hide. But inside, it was really just 3 people orbiting around a single truth. Love isn't given, it's chosen. My earliest memories are of Sunday evenings, Eleanor in her pale blue apron dusted with flour, humming to Billie Holiday, while I sifted powdered sugar over shortbread cookies. "Don't rush the folding, honey," she'd say, her silver hair slipping from its bun. "Patience makes sweetness stay." Theo sat nearby, a stack of law journals beside his plate, reading passages out loud in his smooth courtroom voice. I didn't understand half the words, but I liked how serious they sounded, like spells from an ancient book. "You hear that, Sloan?" he'd say, tapping the page. "Integrity isn't situational. It's the foundation." Back then, I just nodded, sneaking bits of dough into my mouth. I didn't know that one day those words would be all I had left to hold on to. My mother, Veronica, rarely joined these rituals. She lived in a townhouse across the river, where the wine was imported, the mirrors spotless, and every emotion rehearsed. The promise board, a corkboard by the kitchen door, kept count of her absences. Each sticky note marked another holiday, recital, or birthday she promised to attend but didn't. "Work trip," one said in her looping cursive. "Migraine. Flight delayed." Grandma never removed the notes. She said promises, like weeds, tell their own story if you let them grow. Once, when I was 8, Veronica did show up Christmas morning. She arrived in fur and heels, trailing cold perfume and cigarette smoke. I remember clutching the small gift I'd wrapped for her, a hand-drawn portrait of the 3 of us. She barely glanced at it before handing me a box wrapped in gold paper. Inside was a designer scarf. "You'll appreciate it when you're older," she said. I didn't. It smelled like a stranger. That was the last Christmas she came. Theo and Eleanor filled the gaps with rituals that stitched my world together: jazz on the radio, lemon, and lavender from the oven, the sound of rain on porch tin. When Theo wasn't in court, he was teaching me patience. When Eleanor wasn't teaching third graders, she was teaching me care. We never talked much about Damien, my father. His presence was more myth than memory. A voice on a phone once a year. A check that arrived on my birthday, signed with a flourish but no note. At 10, I learned the art of silence. When other kids bragged about family vacations or parents at parent-teacher nights, I just smiled. It was easier than explaining absence. I didn't know it back then, but those quiet Sundays were building my defense long before any courtroom ever would. When I turned 12, I cut my finger opening a can of peaches. The scar is still there, a pale crescent on my right index finger. Eleanor wrapped it gently, whispering, "Even small wounds leave reminders, Sloan. Don't rush to heal what's meant to teach." That same summer, she started planting camellias around the house, white and pink, some red as blood. "They bloom late," she told me, "when everything else is done trying. They stay even when it gets cold." I didn't understand, but I loved how stubborn they looked. Theo, meanwhile, began letting me sit quietly in the back of the county courthouse. He'd glance my way before every ruling, a silent nod of trust. I'd sit there, feet barely touching the floor, memorizing the rhythm of justice. "Law isn't about punishment," he once said as we walked home through the courthouse garden. "It's about restoration, restoring truth where it's been buried." I didn't realize then how often truth would need digging up in my own family. When Eleanor died of a sudden stroke, I was 22 and in my second year at Duke Law. I remember the call coming between finals, Theo's voice flat, stripped of its usual warmth. "She went peacefully, sweetheart." She was in her garden. The flight home was a blur of white noise and grief. I arrived to find the camellias in full bloom and the promise board untouched. Her last sticky note read, "Veronica said she'll come for Easter. Bought a roast just in case." She never came. Theo didn't cry at the funeral. He just held my hand, squeezing once before stepping forward to speak. His words were short, sharp, and true. "My wife believed in showing up. That's all she ever asked of anyone. Just show up." I felt something shift that day, a quiet inheritance that didn't involve money. A torch passed silently through grief. After that, I drove home every Sunday. Theo would be on the porch by 6, waiting, 2 mugs of coffee steaming in the cool air. I kept the tradition alive even through law school, even during trial prep weeks when my classmates were out drinking or sleeping. We had our rhythm: coffee, dinner, jazz, and always dessert. I took over Eleanor's shortbread recipe, even kept her apron, the one with the fading blue print. I didn't know it then, but those visits would later become Exhibit A in the case that accused me of manipulation. Theo changed his will 10 years before he died: 2 signatures, 1 notary, all above board. He never hid it from me. "A person's estate should go to those who keep it alive," he said, pouring coffee into his chipped mug, "not to those who treat it like a trophy." He'd laugh sometimes, a dry chuckle that carried the weight of irony. "Blood makes people lazy, loyalty keeps them honest." When Veronica found out how, I never knew, she sent an email laced with polite outrage. "Surely you're not serious, Daddy. Family is family." Theo didn't reply, but I saw him slip that printed email into a folder labeled Legacy. Years later, when we sat in that same kitchen, he pulled out his checkbook. "Your mother's never been destitute," he said. "I've sent her money every month. But charity doesn't buy conscience." Number 4. He handed me a list of transfers, 22 years worth, each $3,250. Neat and precise. "I keep records," he said. "Always have." I laughed then, not realizing how much those records would save me. In law school, I tried to break the cycle, to forgive her absence, to stop caring whether she ever called. But forgiveness doesn't come easy when the wound keeps reopening. On my 25th birthday, a card arrived with her handwriting. Elegant, familiar. "So proud of you, darling. Wish I could be there." It was postmarked from Italy. She hadn't even mailed it on time. I placed it in the same folder as the others. Promises. Theo saw me do it and said nothing. He just reached for my hand. His was colder than usual that night. I didn't know it then, But that was the beginning of the end, the slow unraveling of a man who had spent his life holding others accountable while his own family kept slipping through his fingers. And yet, he never turned bitter. He still kept her photo on the mantle, dusted weekly by Ruth. Still sent the checks. Still believed, somehow, that people could come back. I wanted to believe that too. When he passed 3 months after his 84th birthday, the house felt like it exhaled for the first time. Empty, echoing, still smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and lavender. I found his will in the top drawer of his desk, exactly where he said it would be. Attached was a letter addressed to me in his square handwriting. To Sloane read this only when you are ready to understand why love must sometimes be proven, not assumed. I didn't open it then. Maybe I was afraid of what it would ask of me. I didn't know it back then, but that letter would become the heartbeat of everything that followed the proof they didn't know existed. The year after my grandfather's death, the house stood silent but stubborn. The porch swing still moved when the wind cut across the yard, and the camellias bloomed even though no one tended them. I moved back for a few months, unable to bear the thought of strangers walking those floors. Ruth, the housekeeper who had worked for us since I was 5, refused to retire. "This place remembers good people," she said, polishing Theo's framed law degree. "It still needs you." Those months blurred into something like recovery. I'd wake early, brew coffee the way Theo liked, strong, no sugar, and sit at his desk going through his files. He'd labeled everything in thick black ink, always the same handwriting: estate, donations, letters, legacy. Every drawer smelled faintly of cedar and pipe tobacco. Sometimes, I talked to him out loud, just to fill the space. "Grandpa, you'd hate the way they talk about you in those gossip columns." I'd say, "They think your mind went soft." And I'd wait, half expecting his voice to come back from the walls, dry and certain, then show them otherwise. "Sloane." I started organizing the paperwork, bank transfers, medical notes, signed affidavits. He had anticipated everything, down to the witnesses. But still, something gnawed at me. A quiet question I hadn't yet asked. Why me? Why leave it all to the granddaughter and not his only child? One night, I found the answer. It was tucked inside a locked box in the garage, hidden behind a stack of paint cans. The key had been taped under his desk. Inside were 3 items: a cassette labeled Eleanor's Last Summer, a USB drive, and the sealed envelope I hadn't opened at his death. The cassette crackled when I played it in an old radio. Eleanor's voice filled the room, soft but firm. "July 14th. Theo's pruning the camellias again. Says they keep him honest. Sloane's leaving for Duke soon. Veronica called, canceled another visit." I stopped writing them on the board. No point keeping score when you already know the ending. Then, a pause. But she doesn't know this part matters. One day, it'll protect her. I sat there frozen, the whir of the tape louder than my heartbeat. The USB held scanned copies of Theo's personal journal daily entries, neatly typed, time-stamped, cross-referenced with call logs. There were pages of notes about my visits, his health checkups, and his decisions regarding the estate. But the last folder stopped me cold. It was titled simply, "For When They Come." Inside was a single document, his final letter to me. "Sloane, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and she's already reaching for what she never earned. Don't let guilt blur what's clear." I changed the will when I still held full capacity, documented, witnessed, notarized. "You inherit not because of blood, but because you stayed." People confuse affection with obligation. You never did. I didn't cry the first time I read it. I just sat in the glow of the desk lamp, the words sinking into me like anchors. That night, I baked Eleanor's shortbread for the first time since the funeral. The house smelled alive again: lemon zest, butter, a trace of lavender. I left a plate on the porch rail, where she used to cool her pies. In the morning, crumbs were gone, swept by wind or faith. I told myself it was closure. But closure is just another lie we tell ourselves when we're too afraid to face the next fight. 6 months later, an envelope arrived at my office. No return address. Inside, a glossy magazine photo of Veronica at a charity gala, smiling in front of a Hale and Whitmore Estates banner. Scribbled beneath it in red ink, "Family doesn't abandon family." It wasn't a threat, it was a warning shot. That same week, Lydia Beaumont walked into my office. She'd been my mentor once, back when I interned during her Supreme Court days. She still spoke in that soft Georgia drawl that could slice through steel. Heard about the whispers, she said, setting down her briefcase. You'll need me when they stop whispering and start suing. I wanted to argue that Veronica wouldn't dare. But Lydia just raised an eyebrow. Sweetheart, your mother's pride is louder than reason. She was right. The lawsuit came exactly 4 months later. But even before that, I'd seen the signs reporters sniffing around, anonymous sources claiming Theo had dementia, a podcast episode dissecting the inheritance scandal of Charleston's elite. I remember the first time someone recognized me at a coffee shop. Aren't you the prosecutor who stole her parents' inheritance? The words hit harder than I expected. By the time the official complaint arrived, I had already assembled my defense. Every record Theo left became a weapon of truth, his medical evaluations from Dr. Ortiz, his journals, the proof of monthly transfers to Veronica. I cataloged each document with surgical precision. Still, there was one thing I couldn't catalog. Why Damien stayed silent. He'd never been cruel, just absent, like a man allergic to emotional proximity. But absence can wound deeper than hate. At my high school graduation, I looked for him in the stands, scanning every face under the summer sun. He wasn't there. Later, I learned he was closing a deal in Atlanta. He sent flowers, white lilies, which I hate. I didn't know it then, but that habit, his distance, his quiet tremor whenever he lied would become the thread that unraveled everything later. In the weeks before the trial, the town started choosing sides. Old Charleston families whispered about bloodline betrayal. Pastor Ellison visited me once, bringing lemon tea and a calm I didn't deserve. You can't preach forgiveness to people who've never practiced it, he said. Just stand tall. The truth always finds light. I wanted to believe him, but at night, the phone would buzz with blocked calls. Some anonymous voices cursed me. One simply said, "Hope your camellias die too." I went out that night and watered every bush by hand. "Not tonight," I whispered to them. "We're not dying tonight." When the pretrial conference was announced, I stood outside courtroom 3 again, the same marble corridor, where Veronica once told me that appearances mattered more than truth. The hallway smelled of polish and paper, the air thick with echoes of my grandfather's footsteps. Reporters crowded the stairs, flashbulbs slicing through the morning fog. Lydia stood beside me, calm as a surgeon. "You ready?" she asked. "I was raised for this," I said. "They just didn't know it." That night, I dreamed of Eleanor in her garden, pruning camellias under a sky swollen with rain. She turned to me and said, "You know why these flowers outlive the frost, don't you?" I shook my head. "Because they remember warmth, even when it's gone." I woke with tears on my face and a decision made. If they wanted war, I would give them truth. Not anger, not revenge, truth sharp enough to cut through every lie they'd ever told about who stayed and who left. I didn't know it then, but the box in that garage, the letter, the cassette, the USB would become my grandfather's final argument from beyond the grave. And it would be the one case I couldn't afford to lose. The first day of the trial smelled like dust, coffee, and perfume too expensive for honesty. Courtroom 3 was colder than I remembered, air vents humming above oak benches, sunlight cutting across the seal of South Carolina behind the judge's chair. Reporters filled the back row, their pens poised like daggers. I sat beside Lydia, her posture straight, expression unreadable. "Smile small," she whispered. "They'll photograph you before they hear you." Judge Aaron Whitaker entered, his gavel tapping twice. The same man my grandfather once mentored, now the arbiter of his legacy. He nodded briefly at me, then to the courtroom. "Proceed." Trent Mallory, my mother's attorney, stood first. He was tall, tanned, and far too comfortable in front of cameras. "Your Honor," he began, turning slightly toward the reporters. "This case is about deception disguised as devotion. A daughter robbed of her rightful inheritance by a cunning prosecutor who preyed on an elderly man's fading mind." His words slithered through the room. Veronica dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief, coral lipstick unbothered. Damien sat beside her, eyes down, jaw tight. I focused on my breathing. In, hold, out. When it was Lydia's turn, she rose without looking at the crowd. "Your Honor, the plaintiffs have already admitted under oath that Judge Ashford was of sound mind for years before his death. The defense will prove he changed his will not out of confusion but conviction. Because while others left, one person stayed." Her voice sliced the air clean. Still, I could feel the tension crackling around us. That invisible pull between appearance and truth. Charleston society wasn't here for justice. They were here for spectacle. During recess, I stepped into the hallway for air. Veronica cornered me before I could escape. "Still pretending you're the hero?" she murmured, her breath laced with mint and venom. "I don't have to pretend," I said. Her smile never faltered. "Do you really think a letter and some homemade cookies make you heir to a legacy?" "Legacy isn't inherited," I said. "It's earned." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, something that looked almost like fear. Then she turned, heels clicking like gunfire on marble. That evening, Charleston Gazette dropped another bomb. The headline screamed across my phone, "Great Fix Scandal. Did Judge Ashford pull strings for his granddaughter at Duke?" I froze mid-breath. The article cited anonymous academic records suggesting a manipulated exam grade. Total fiction, but dangerous fiction. Within hours, online comments tore through my reputation. Nepotism, fraud, crooked bloodline. Lydia arrived at my apartment past midnight, still in her courtroom heels. She tossed a printout on the table. We traced the metadata. The email came from a burner account created by your mother's PR assistant. My chest tightened. They fabricated evidence? They fabricated a story, Lydia said, pouring herself a whiskey. "We'll turn it into perjury if they're stupid enough to repeat it under oath." I sank into the couch. The hum of my refrigerator sounded louder than traffic outside. "They're trying to ruin me before I even take the bench." "That's what cowards do," she said, lighting a cigarette. "They make noise when they can't make a case." I didn't sleep that night. I replayed every Sunday dinner, every birthday card that never came, wondering how far a mother could go to erase her own daughter's name. By day 3, Dr. Leonard Pike took the stand. New to Charleston, polished voice, perfect posture. He adjusted his tie like it was armor. "I evaluated Judge Ashford approximately 10 months before his passing," he said. "He showed signs of mild cognitive decline and susceptibility to influence." Trent smiled like he'd won. "So you're saying he was vulnerable?" "Yes, in my professional opinion." Lydia rose. "Your professional opinion based on 2 visits?" He hesitated. "Yes." "And those visits lasted how long?" "An hour each." "So, 2 hours total," Lydia said, pacing. 2 hours to diagnose a man who argued constitutional law until the day he died. Pike fidgeted. Lydia stepped closer, holding up a document. "You opened your clinic 8 months before these visits, correct?" "Yes." "And your business partner Caroline Pike is related to the plaintiff, Veronica Hale, by marriage?" The courtroom murmured. Pike's Adam's apple bobbed. "That's irrelevant. It's bias." Lydia cut in, her southern lilt sharpening. "Plain and simple." Judge Whitaker overruled Trent's objection, his eyes narrowing. Pike's credibility cracked like thin ice. After court, I walked alone through the courthouse garden, where Eleanor's camellias still bloomed. I traced one of the petals velvety, fragile. "They remember warmth even when it's gone," she'd said. "But warmth didn't stop you from freezing when your own mother weaponized your name." Reporters waited at the gate, shouting questions. "Miss Parker, did you manipulate your grandfather's will? Did you use your legal career to control him? Is it true your mother plans to testify you restricted her access?" I kept walking. The only sound I trusted was the gravel crunch under my shoes. That night, my phone buzzed again, another unknown number. This time, I answered. "You think you're righteous?" A man's voice sneered. "You ruined your parents' lives." I hung up, but my hands were shaking. Ruth called 5 minutes later. "Child, I saw the news. Don't let them turn you into what they are." Her voice steadied me more than she'll ever know. The next morning, Lydia found me in the courthouse cafeteria, untouched coffee in front of me. "Whitaker's under pressure," she said quietly. "They've filed a motion for him to recuse himself. Claim he can't be impartial because Theo mentored him." My stomach dropped. "Will he step down?" "He says no," she replied. "He filed a public statement. Transparency, not withdrawal." "He's braver than I am." I murmured. "No," Lydia said, leaning closer. "He's just seen you fight." By the end of week 1, tension felt physical, a storm pressing down on everyone in that courtroom. Veronica's public charm began to fracture under the weight of evidence Lydia kept sliding across the table. Financial records, photographs, phone logs. Each time Lydia presented another document, Trent's smile thinned a little more. But still, The whispers spread. Charleston thrives on gossip, and every whisper felt like a paper cut you can't see until you're bleeding. After one hearing, Veronica brushed past me near the elevators. "You've embarrassed this family enough," she hissed. "You think anyone will ever trust you on a bench after this?" I smiled cold, tired. Trust isn't inherited either. The elevator doors closed between us, her reflection fading into mine. That night, I met Lydia at Mariner's Diner, a place that hadn't changed since 1978, neon sign flickering, coffee burnt to perfection. She spread case files over the booth. "We've got one more problem," she said. "They're moving to strike the promise board and your grandfather's recordings as hearsay." My jaw tightened. Those are his words, his handwriting, his life. "We'll argue under the business records and state of mind exceptions," Lydia said. "If we lose those exhibits, we lose the soul of the case. That's why event one of the process become backed and admitted. I glanced out the window at the harbor lights shimmering against the dark water. "They think they can erase a lifetime with paperwork. They'll try," she said, closing the folder. "But people like your mother always underestimate the quiet ones." That night, I opened the USB again, scrolling through Theo's journal entries. One line caught my eye. "When law fails, love must testify." I stared at it until the screen blurred. I didn't know it then, but love was about to take the stand in ways no one expected. By the start of week 2, the courthouse felt smaller, like the walls themselves were closing in on us. Every morning, the same ritual: reporters stationed by the doors, cameras waiting for my expression. I learned to smile just enough to look composed, but not enough to look smug. Lydia called it the prosecutor's mask. The plaintiff's case began to crumble under its own weight, but they weren't done swinging. That Monday, Veronica took the stand. She wore navy silk, pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The picture of Southern grace if you didn't know the rot beneath. "Mrs. Hale," Trent said, guiding her gently through her testimony, "can you tell the court about your relationship with your father during his final years?" Her eyes shimmered on cue. He was distant. Ever since Sloan moved back into his life, he stopped taking my calls. I tried to visit, but she paused for effect. She controlled everything, even his medication. A murmur rippled through the gallery. I felt Lydia tense beside me. She rose slowly. "Mrs. Hale, you're under oath, correct?" Veronica's jaw twitched. "Of course." Lydia approached, her heels clicking like a metronome. "Let's clarify a few things. You claim you called your father often?" "Yes." "Would you read these phone records aloud?" Lydia handed her a highlighted page. "You made 10 calls in 15 years, Mrs. Hale." 10. Veronica blinked, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "And about the medication," Lydia continued. "You said Sloan controlled everything. But you haven't set foot in that house for over a decade, have you?" Veronica's voice tightened. "I was unwelcome." "You were uninterested," Lydia corrected softly. "Your father's journals admitted into evidence yesterday, recorded every promised visit, every one you missed." The page turned. Lydia read aloud. December 24th. Veronica promised to come. Sloan baked shortbread for her. Never arrived. The courtroom was silent, except for the scratch of pens. "Would you like me to read more?" Lydia asked. "No," Veronica whispered. "Then, one last question," Lydia said, her voice like velvet over steel. "If you loved your father so deeply, Mrs. Hale, why did he pay you $3,250 every month for 22 years, totaling $858,000? And you still claim financial neglect?" Veronica's silence said everything. That night, Charleston buzzed. The Gazette published a photo of her on the stand, eyes wide, caught mid-lie. The caption read, "Mother's tears, daughter's truth." For the first time, the tide turned. But the next morning brought a new twist. Trent called a surprise rebuttal witness. The name echoed through the room like a gunshot. Damian Hale. My father. He adjusted his tie 3 times before sitting. His voice was low, hesitant. "I love my daughter," he began, not looking at me. "But I believe she influenced her grandfather's decision. Theo always valued fairness. He wouldn't have cut Veronica out completely." Trent smiled like he'd just landed a knockout. "So, you believe manipulation occurred?" "I believe persuasion did." Lydia stood. "Mr. Hale, how many times did you visit your daughter after she turned 10? "Several," he he said too quickly. Define several. He hesitated. Maybe 2. The gallery laughed quietly. Judge Whitaker banged his gavel once. Do you know where your daughter went to law school? Lydia asked. He blinked. Yale? Duke? Lydia corrected. Summa cum laude. Did you attend her graduation? His throat worked. No. So, Lydia said, stepping closer. You can't recall her school, her graduation, or her address. But you believe you know her character enough to accuse her of manipulation? He swallowed hard. Veronica said. Exactly. Lydia cut in. You're repeating what your wife told you. Nothing more. He glanced toward Veronica, who refused to meet his eyes. For the first time, I saw something raw behind his expression shame. During recess, I stepped outside for air. The spring heat pressed against my skin, thick with pollen and tension. That's when Jenna Carlisle from the Gazette approached me. Miss Parker, off the record, she said, voice low. We verified that email story, the one about Duke. The burner account was traced to Veronica's PR agency. We're running a retraction. I stared at her, breath catching. You'll print the truth? She smiled faintly. Always does better than lies in the long run. More clicks, too. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like oxygen return to my lungs. Inside, Damien sat alone at the plaintiff's table, Veronica whispering furiously into Trent's ear. Whatever she was saying made his jaw tighten. When court resumed, Lydia quietly handed me a note. Watch your father. I did, during Trent's redirect. Damien's hand trembled again. The same nervous tick I remembered from childhood when he'd lie about where he'd been. Mr. Hale, Trent said, did Judge Ashford ever communicate to you about his intentions with the estate? Damien hesitated, then exhaled. Yes. Trent leaned forward. And what did he say? Damien's gaze shifted toward me, then back to the judge. He said, quote, money for Veronica doesn't mean inheritance rights. He wanted to be clear about that. Trent froze. The courtroom went utterly still. Mr. Hale, Judge Whitaker said, eyes narrowing. Are you stating that under oath? Yes, Your Honor, Damien said, voice firmer now. He gave me that letter himself. Trent's face drained of color. Veronica's hand dropped from her pearl necklace. Lydia whispered, that's it. After court, I found Damien outside near the fountain. He didn't turn when I approached. You didn't have to do that, I said quietly. Yes, I did. His voice was rougher than I remembered. Your mother's been chasing ghosts for years. Maybe now she'll stop. Do you believe that? He gave a weak smile. Not really. But maybe it'll stop you from becoming one too. He walked away before I could answer. That night, I met Lydia again at Mariner's Diner. The neon buzzed overhead, the air thick with fried onions and tension. He broke their case in half, she said, sliding a file across the table. Damien's letter is admissible. It confirms your grandfather's intent. I ran a finger over the manila folder. And Veronica? She's unraveling, Lydia said. Her cousin's fund ties her directly to Pike's clinic. I'm filing a motion for sanctions tomorrow. I stared out the window at the harbor lights. They wanted to bury me in their lies. All they did was dig their own grave. Lydia smiled faintly. Careful, Judge Parker. That sounds almost like victory talk. Not yet, I said. Victory's earned, not assumed. Outside, thunder rolled over the water. The storm had been building for days. That night, I returned to the Ashford house. Rain tapped against the windows, steady and relentless. I went to the study, opened Theo's old desk drawer, and took out his watch. The second hand ticked with the same stubborn rhythm as my pulse. I pressed the play button on Eleanor's cassette again. Her voice filled the silence. Remember, Sloane, people can lie about who you are, but they can't fake who stayed. I closed my eyes, hearing her laughter under the static. Tomorrow, we'd call our final witnesses. Tomorrow, the truth would either stand or shatter. But I already knew which way it would go. Because the ones who left were running out of stories, and the ones who stayed still had proof. The morning of the final hearing felt different too still, like the world was holding its breath. Rain clung to the courthouse steps, turning the marble slick and shining. Lydia and I walked side by side through the flash of cameras and murmured headlines. Inside, courtroom 3 hummed with tension reporters. Socialites, old Charleston families all packed shoulder to shoulder, waiting for blood. Judge Whitaker entered, his expression carved from stone. We'll proceed with closing arguments, he said, his gavel echoing like thunder. Trent Mallory buttoned his jacket and stepped into the spotlight. Your Honor, he began, pacing before the jury box. This case isn't about legal documents or bank transfers, it's about family. About a mother who loved her father and a daughter who turned that love into leverage. His voice grew louder, feeding off the gallery's whispers. Charleston was built on legacy, on blood. You can't rewrite that with sentiment and cookies. He gestured toward me like I was evidence instead of a person. Miss Parker is a skilled attorney. She knows how to build a case, how to spin a narrative. But in doing so, she's convinced even herself that loyalty excuses manipulation. The plaintiffs only ask for fairness, for tradition. When he finished, Veronica dabbed her eyes again. A single tear caught the light perfectly. Damien didn't look at her. Lydia stood next. No theatrics, just that calm precision that always made a room go still. She held a single page of paper. Your Honor, this isn't about blood. It's about who stayed. She unfolded the letter slowly, letting the silence stretch. This is Judge Theodore Ashford's final letter, dated 2 weeks before his passing. I'll read it into the record. Her voice softened, carrying across the courtroom like prayer. Sloane, you inherit not because you share my blood, but because you shared my days. When Sunday dinners grew quiet after Eleanor passed, you never missed one. When law school kept you busy, you studied at my kitchen table. When your parents asked for money, they never once asked about you. Family isn't defined by lineage, but by presence. I choose you because you chose me. Lydia set the letter down gently. The courtroom had gone utterly silent. No cameras clicking, no whispers, just the slow, painful sound of Veronica's composure cracking. Your Honor, Lydia said. We also present Exhibit 43, Dr. Ortiz's cognitive assessment of Judge Ashford, conducted 1 week after Dr. Pike's so-called evaluation. She handed the report to the bailiff. Page 4, paragraph 2. Judge Whitaker read aloud. Cognitive function remains sharp and consistent with previous evaluations. No signs of confusion or diminished capacity. He looked up, gaze hard as glass. Continue, Counselor. Lydia nodded to the clerk, who rolled in a small screen. We'll play a voicemail retrieved from Judge Ashford's USB drive, dated June 2017. A click. Then my mother's voice, smooth and shallow. Dad, can't make it to Sloane's graduation again. We're heading to Aspen for the week. Transfer the deposit when you can. The recording ended with silence thick enough to choke on. Lydia let it sit for a beat before turning to Veronica. That's your voice, correct? Veronica's face flushed, taken out of context. The context, Lydia said, is that you were at a ski resort while your daughter graduated law school, and your father was home alone. Trent started to object, but Judge Whitaker lifted a hand. Overruled. Proceed. Lydia continued, calm and merciless. Miranda Cho, Judge Ashford's financial advisor of 18 years, has confirmed consistent transfers of $3,250 a month to Veronica Hale for 22 years, totaling $858,000. That's not neglect. That's support. She turned to the judge. My client never asked for a cent, never demanded inheritance. All she ever did was show up. Her final words hung in the air. You can't buy presents. You can't fake staying. Then Lydia did something unexpected. She gestured to Damien, sitting pale and motionless at the plaintiff's table. Your Honor, the defense calls Mr. Hale back for one clarification. Trent stiffened. Objection. Overruled, Whitaker said. Damien stood, shoulders heavy. Lydia handed him a letter. Mr. Hale, is this your handwriting? He nodded. Yes. Please read the first line. His voice trembled. Theo, thank you for your honesty. I understand the difference between giving money and giving legacy. Lydia nodded. That was written after Judge Ashford told you Veronica would not inherit, correct? Yes, Damien said. He wanted me to know it wasn't out of cruelty. He said. He paused, eyes flicking toward Veronica. He said love has nothing to do with possession. The room fell dead silent. Veronica's eyes burned holes into him, but Damien didn't flinch. Lydia returned to the defense table and rested her hand over mine. Her whisper was barely audible. Now we wait. Judge Whitaker leaned forward, elbows on the bench. His gaze swept the courtroom before settling on me. I knew Theodore Ashford for 30 years, he began. He was methodical, rational, and fiercely devoted to integrity. The evidence shows his mind was sound, his decision deliberate. He looked toward Veronica. The plaintiffs have provided no credible proof of undue influence. Quite the opposite, the documentation, testimony, and financial records paint a clear picture of consistent absence, not manipulation. He paused, voice lowering. This court finds the will valid and executed with full legal capacity. The plaintiff's claim is dismissed with prejudice. The gavel struck once. Sharp, final. For a moment, no one moved. Then Veronica let out a sound between a gasp and a sob. Damien closed his eyes, shoulders sinking. Cameras flashed, catching the instant everything they'd built on lies collapsed. Lydia gathered her papers, serene as a surgeon who's finished the last stitch. "Told you truth has good timing," she murmured. I couldn't speak. My throat felt raw, my chest hollow. The noise of reporters, the shuffle of feet, it all blurred. The only thing clear was the weight lifting from somewhere deep in my ribs. As I left the courtroom, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet camellias and wood polish. Whitaker called out softly behind me, "Miss Parker, your grandfather would be proud." I turned, meeting his steady gaze. "I hope so, Your Honor. He taught me that justice isn't revenge, it's restoration." Outside, Veronica and Damien walked in opposite directions. She clutched her pearls like armor. He didn't look back. I stood on the courthouse steps, the letters still warm in my hands. The storm had broken, but what came next, that was up to me. The courthouse emptied slowly, voices fading down the marble halls like ghosts finally leaving. I sat alone for a long time, the echo of the gavel still in my chest. The letter from Theo rested on my lap, creased now, but alive. Proof that truth had outlasted spectacle. Outside, Charleston's spring light broke through retreating clouds, turning every puddle into mirrors. Reporters swarmed near the gates. But I slipped out the side exit where the garden opened toward the harbor. The air smelled like rain and camellias. Eleanor's flowers were blooming again, crimson, stubborn, unapologetically alive. Lydia found me standing there, her heels sinking into the damp grass. "They'll appeal," she said softly. "I know. But they'll lose again." She smiled faintly. "You won the war before it even began. You just didn't know it yet." I nodded, watching the petals tremble in the wind. "Theo used to say truth doesn't shout, it waits. And when it speaks," Lydia added, "it doesn't whisper." We stood there a moment longer, the silence between us steady and kind. Then she left, promising to send over the closing paperwork. Back inside the empty house that night, I walked to the garage, the place where the box of evidence had first waited for me. The air was cool, smelling faintly of motor oil and dust. I opened the drawer again, finding one last envelope I hadn't noticed before, wedged behind the cassette case. It was addressed in Theo's handwriting, "For when it's quiet again." Inside was a flash drive labeled simply Legacy. My pulse quickened as I inserted it into my laptop. Dozens of files appeared, journals, letters, court notes, and recordings. But one folder stood out, the Hales Trust offshore accounts. My breath caught. Theo hadn't just prepared for their lawsuit. He had tracked everything: shell companies, wire transfers, tax evasions, all under Veronica's name. I leaned back, heartbeat drumming in my ears. "You saw this coming, didn't you?" I whispered. The screen glowed in the dark, the word legacy reflected in my eyes. They thought they had destroyed me in court. They had only handed me the one weapon they feared most: truth, documented, dated, and waiting. Outside, thunder rolled again somewhere over the harbor, soft but promising. I saved the file to a new drive, locked it away beside his watch, and whispered into the quiet, "Justice isn't revenge, Grandpa, but sometimes it knows how to rhyme." The camellias swayed in the night wind, blooming brighter in the storm. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit like and subscribe, because stories like mine aren't rare. Sometimes, the people who leave write your scars. But the ones who stay, they write your legacy. This story isn't over. Truth always finds its way back to the light.